Welcome to And What Have You, the weekly podcast where I talk about movies, video games, books, and, well, what have you. I'm your host, Abram Williams. This week we're talking about some quickies, which basically means that this is a kind of low-effort, quick overview episode with the major flaws and good things about a couple different topics like a movie, a game, and a book this week that I want to talk about briefly, but that don't merit an entire episode. And it also allows me to put out an episode one week to earn myself some more time to play a game or read a book that I'm currently working through. Right now, I'm playing through Mass Effect 1, just trying to wrap that up so I can review it, hopefully, for next week. So in the meantime, because I haven't finished any great games recently or seen any particularly earth-shattering movies, we're going to talk about a couple quick different things. Three in particular. As always, there will be some spoilers as I go through this. It's not as bad as my game reviews or my in-depth reviews because those are like breaking down everything about it. This is just going to be like a rough breakdown of the storyline and the things that I thought were good and bad. So first off, we got The Shack, which is a movie currently in theaters, I believe, still, based on a book by William P. Young. Now, I'm going to give you a quick rundown on what the plot is, and then talk about what I thought were the major flaws and good parts of the movie. So, just a note, there's not going to be much visual content this episode, because these slides are basically just to help me keep my thoughts organized, so if you just want to listen to it, go for it. So, The Shack was a book written 2004-ish. I'm going to throw out a random estimate. So here's a brief rundown of the plot. It's not really super complicated, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. The plot is as such. There's a guy, and he's like Christian, but about God, and doesn't really know what to think of him. His wife's super Christian, though. And he takes his kids on this trip. He has three, two daughters and a son. And while his older daughter and son are almost drowning, he goes to save them while on this trip, comes back and finds out that his youngest daughter, who's like 5, is missing and presumably abducted because there's the mark of a serial killer left behind, and so on and so forth. There's a big search, and then the police find what they can find for remains in a shack in the middle of some woods, thus the title. Roll by, I think, about a year. I'm not really positive. I don't recall 100%. But about a year of time passes. And it's winter. And his family, which has had many problems since his youngest daughter being murdered by a serial killer. Unsurprisingly, that doesn't exactly leave you exactly healthy. Is off on a trip and he's alone in the house. He goes out to shovel the driveway. And he works on it, asks for something from his neighbor, goes back, and, or actually at the end of his driveway, he checks the mailbox, and there's a letter in there, and it says, "It's been a while since I've seen you, Mac." His name's Mackenzie. "Come meet me at the shack this weekend if you want to." And it's signed Papa. The shack is obviously the shack where his daughter's body was found, but Papa is his family's cutesy name for God, who he's never been very close with. So obviously there's a big kerfuffle. Did God actually write me a letter? There's no footprints by the mailbox, which tends to suggest that he would. So he decides that it's worth going alone to the shack to see if God really shows up. So he does that. He takes his neighbor's truck without permission, kind of. It doesn't really matter. Almost gets hit by a truck that comes in relative importance later. Goes to the shack, meets with God, talks through all his problems, settles a bunch of his emotional issues, comes to be close to God, yada yada yada, everything's a happy ending. Even finds his daughter's body for law enforcement, which eventually gets the murderer caught. Then heads home. At the end, he wakes up, and it turns out that he was actually hit when he almost got hit by the truck on the way to the shack, and that he's been unconscious ever since and never actually made it. Now, this storyline is kind of contrite. It's not bad. And in fact, it could be very good. Like, the book itself, I consider fantastic. The book was great. I loved every minute of it. The storyline is a bit eh. It's not the best story ever written, but it does deal with a lot of issues. Pain, parental, like, estrangement, not being able to mess with your parents, how you deal with pain and reconcile that with God. There's a lot of good theological, emotional, psychological issues brought up in the story. As far as the story goes, it was copied almost word for word from the book. It was well done. It was executed exactly as it was in the book. There was no variation, which in this case I think is good. There are some books where it wouldn't translate well, like Lord of the Rings, but this one in particular definitely worked with that. There were some flaws, though, or rather, I guess you can boil it down to one flaw, which was budget. Because the movie was kind of mainly because of budgetary concerns. First off, the special effects were pretty bad, like clearly bad, which I don't actually fault it for, because it's not exactly made by LucasArts here. It doesn't really have the resources to do good ones, but it's a factor nonetheless. But mainly I would say the issue was acting, casting, and the caliber of actors they could get for it. Because like I said, this dealt with a lot of painful themes. But because they had to get B-tier actors, as it were, because of budgetary concerns, obviously aren't going to cast, I don't know, Will Smith in this movie. Not that he would fit, there was no Will Smith character, but because they had to get B-tier actors, it wasn't as good as it could have been, and felt kind of hackneyed and dodgy. Because the emotions weren't quite all there, as far as the acting went. Had they been able to get... his name's eluding me right now, which it shouldn't be. But you know the actor in the live-action Robin Hood that was really intense? That Scottish guy? His name is always not in my head. But regardless, the one who always looks like he's constipated, that guy, had they been able to get him for the lead role, had he not had a Scottish accent, and separated from all his other works, he would have been perfect. Like, I don't know, let me think of some others. People who have mastered the pain look, you know, the suffering kind of face. It's... I don't know. Essentially, the main issue is the actors they got were alright, and they tried hard, but they didn't quite pull off the emotions. There wasn't enough pain and frustration in Mackenzie's face. There wasn't enough, you know, that kind of empathetic look someone gets when they love you, but they also are in pain for you. Sympathy, empathy combo. There wasn't enough of that in Jesus' face. Like, the casting, I mean, it fit characters, but the acting was just low quality enough that they couldn't quite pull off the emotions that they needed to. Not that the acting was bad, it was acceptable on many fronts. It's just, it wasn't good enough, and this would have been a very acting-centric movie. I wouldn't consider this bad by any stretch of the imagination. It was low budget, it was based off a book that did have a hackneyed storyline, and to expect it to be perfect is ridiculous. Obviously, I wouldn't expect it to have the best acting of all time. But I also didn't think it was a good movie. It was alright. It tried, it was cutesy, it dealt with some basic issues, it moved through, it was okay. I would give it like 5 out of 10, 5.5 out of 10, basically the average scoreline. It was okay. Had they been able to get better actors and do better acting, it would have been very good. But as it stands, it was merely average. It wasn't bad, though. Alright. Next up on the Quickies list, we have The Gunslinger, which is a Stephen King novel from forever ago. First in the Dark Tower series, as I recall. I read this, or rather listened to it, a couple months back, so my recollection is hazy, but frankly there's not much to recall, per se. I'm I mean, the brief storyline is there's a guy chasing another guy. Our hero, the gunslinger, is chasing a man in black who uses magic so he can find the Dark Tower. Apparently, the gunslinger's whole nation got wiped out at some point, and he's chasing the man to get to a tower that may control time somehow. And if that sounds hazy, it's because it is, and very intentionally. So he does that, there's a bunch of shenanigans, he meets a kid, and then eventually sacrifices the kid to achieve his goal. It sounds horrific. Does a bunch of shenanigans, shoots a bunch of people that he didn't want to shoot, and then meets the man in black, learns everything he can from him, and then Man in Black dies, and that's the end of the novel. It sounds horrendously boring, I'm sure. The one-sentence summary makes it sound terrible, but it was very, very well done. The fact that I actually listened to a book with a plot that can be summarized by man chasing another man catches him, it says a great deal about it. It was an intentionally mysterious book. There's a lot that goes unsaid, and even that which is said is pretty much unsaid. He's chasing the Dark Tower for some reason. It's implied that it's because the world's kind of falling into disrepair, time is moving badly, or things are falling apart that shouldn't be, in the past has gone away too quickly. He's chasing the man in black, who it's implied destroyed the gunslinger's kingdom, or like, homeland, at one point. And there's some shenanigans with that. It's hard to explain. It's like a post-apocalyptic novel that doesn't want to tell you it's post-apocalyptic, is the way I listened to it or read it. It was good, though. It was, I don't know how long it would be. It was 6-ish hours in audio. 6 to 8, somewhere in that range. It was really good. I would definitely recommend listening to it or reading it, whichever you prefer. I will talk about the whole series in future, I'm sure, once I finish getting through it. It was mysterious, but it was mysterious for a reason, and you could tell. And when it was unclear for a reason, and you could tell. The characters were good, and where they weren't good, you could tell why. Everything was there for a purpose. It was just overall great writing. The writing matched the character, who's kind of this old westy, cynical, but not even actively, just passively regret-filled man, quite well. It was just overall very well done. It's a very good start to a series, and it leaves enough holes in its world that you want to keep reading just to figure out what the heck is going on. Definitely would recommend 8 out of 10, I would say. Which, I mean, it's a Stephen King novel, what do you expect? Alright, our last quickie of the day is Quake 3. In fact, I'm going to be using these quickie episodes to talk about multiplayer games pretty often, because while I like multiplayer games, they aren't exactly suited to long-form episodes. Quake 3 is the legendary first-person shooter developed by id Software, or ID Software, I've never been clear. The people who made Doom and Wolfenstein. Now, if you aren't familiar, Doom and Wolfenstein were the first ever first-person shooters, if not 3D games. I say that. There was technically a first-person shooter earlier, but it basically doesn't matter. For any intents and purposes, they made the first first-person shooters. They revolutionized PC gaming and the console gaming world, invented engines that nobody else had, and then flamed out after 5 years, and then all retired. One of them flies rockets, the other rolls in dough. It was pretty sad. But in their prime, they made some truly legendary games. One of them was Quake 3. Now, Quake 3 is straightforward. It's called an arcade-style shooter, which basically means you run around shooting things. There's rocket jumping, there's strafe jumping, there's all these obscure mechanical techniques, like you can hop and hold left and right movement options while holding forward and gain speed, and if you do it right, you can fly around like a rocket. You can use your rocket launcher to shoot under you to launch yourself in the air, rocket jumping, etc. There's classic weapons that have defined the genre ever since. Like, it had roughly one of every type of weapon that you see in a first-person shooter. It had the hit scan. You click and you hit if you're on the target. gun, the rail gun. It had the rocket launcher, which shoots projectiles. Like an RPG, it had the grenade launcher. It had yada yada, a machine gun. It had all of it. If you haven't ever played it, I'd recommend playing it for at least 10 hours if you are into first-person shooters, because it is in many ways the game that established the genre, if only because its engine, or derivatives of its earlier engine, have passed down to the generations some of the most legendary games in history, like Half-Life 3. The Source engine was, I think, originally based on the Quake engine. I know the Gold Source engine was. Many of the Call of Duty games passed down arcanely. It's hard to describe just how many games there are based off engines. There's two, if you're curious, the Quake engine and the Unreal engine, and they're pretty much in everything, one of the two. For the simple reason that they were some of the first-person shooters. Quake 3, I consider the perfect distillation of everything a first-person shooter can be and should be. It's a hugely fun game that just requires raw skill and rewards hard work. That's all it is you grind your mechanics and you win. It's awesome in that way. It's just pure, unadulterated. You work harder and you're a better aimer and you win the game. It is worth playing once or twice just to say you did, so you can see where first-person shooters came from. I don't consider it fit for a modern audience necessarily. Not only is it heavily dated in the graphics and kind of the gameplay department too, but it's super hardcore in the sense that the best will just thrash slightly worse players. Like, just thrash them. It's kind of scary. It is definitely worth a play. I don't really feel the need to do a breakdown into it because it's very straightforward. You shoot enemies, you win. It's good. Play it or watch it just to see where first-person shooters came from. It's great fun if you're into hardcore gaming. Alright. That's it for the Quickie episode. Sorry that this is shorter, but I do need the time to breathe and just prep for a longer form episode next week, hopefully, which will be Mass Effect 1, as long as I can finish my Adept playthrough real quick, in which I will talk in depth about Mass Effect 1. I'm going to do each of the games in the series separately, and then probably do 1 or 2 episodes on the series as a whole, and about how it meshed together, yada yada. So tune in next week for a longer form Mass Effect 1 episode, if all goes well. Thanks for tuning in this week. As always, go to my social media below, and today, in the comment section below, if you want to, go ahead and, this is just a random question that popped into my head because of my crippling One Piece addiction. What would your superpower be, if you could have any? Short of omniscience, omnipotence, that sort of thing. Anything with omni, or all-powerful, does not work. That's it. See you next week. Sorry about the shorter episode.